The worst mistake a person can make isn't loving the wrong man. It's realizing too late that the right one had been quietly loving you all along. The first time Noah Brooks smiled at me, I was 16 years old, standing outside a neighborhood ice cream shop with melted chocolate running down my hand because I'd been staring at him instead of eating my cone. He laughed, handed me a stack of napkins, and asked if I always looked so lost. I wanted to tell him that I only looked lost when he was around, but I settled for a nervous thank you before practically sprinting home. Looking back now, I wish that embarrassing moment had been the worst memory he ever gave me. Instead, years later, I found myself sitting in the third row of a wedding venue overlooking Lake Michigan, watching the man I had quietly loved for nearly a decade prepare to marry my older brother. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, every white flower arranged with impossible perfection, every chair tied with satin ribbons that fluttered gently whenever the air conditioning whispered across the room. Guests chatted with bright smiles and glasses of sparkling cider, while a string quartet rehearsed the opening notes of a song I used to imagine playing at my own wedding. Funny how music never changes, only the people standing at the altar. My name is Ethan Carter, and if you had met me that afternoon, you would have thought I looked perfectly fine. Navy suit, polished shoes, calm smile. The dependable younger brother who always arrived early and never caused trouble. Nobody could hear the conversation happening inside my head. Don't look at him too long. Don't wonder what could have happened. Don't let Lucas notice. Especially don't cry today. My brother Lucas had always been the center of every room. He could tell one joke and strangers would feel like lifelong friends. He walked into opportunities while I carefully knocked on doors hoping someone might answer. If life were a movie, Lucas was the leading man. I was the quiet artist sketching posters in the background. And somehow, Noah had chosen him. I told myself there had never been a real competition because Noah had never known how I felt. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was simply easier to survive believing it. I adjusted my tie and glanced toward the front of the room just as Noah appeared beside the officiant. Even after all these years, he had the same steady presence that made crowded spaces feel calmer. He smiled politely at arriving guests, but something about that smile felt carefully assembled, like a painting with one tiny crack hidden beneath fresh varnish. Our eyes met for less than a second. He nodded. I nodded back. Two ordinary gestures that somehow carried the weight of everything neither of us had ever said. "You doing okay?" my cousin Emma whispered as she slid into the seat beside me. "Of course," I answered automatically. "I'm just hoping they remembered to keep the coffee hot." She laughed softly. "Only you would worry about coffee during a wedding." I smiled because it was easier than explaining that focusing on coffee was much safer than admitting my heart felt like it had shown up to its own farewell ceremony. Then the music changed. Every conversation faded. The doors at the back of the ballroom began to open. I took one slow breath and told myself this would be the last time I ever allowed myself to love Noah Brooks. The doors opened slowly, but Lucas never walked through them. At first, nobody seemed to notice. The quartet continued playing. The officiant smiled patiently. A wedding planner checked her watch, whispered into a tiny headset, and disappeared behind a curtain with the practiced confidence of someone who believed every problem could be solved in under 60 seconds. Around me, guests exchanged polite smiles. 5 minutes late was nothing. 10 minutes invited nervous laughter. 15 minutes changed the air completely. I watched Noah standing alone beneath an arch covered in white roses. His posture remained straight, his hands folded neatly in front of him, but I knew him well enough to recognize the smallest cracks. He checked the entrance once. Then again, his smile slowly faded into something quieter, something uncertain. My phone vibrated. Family group chat. "Aunt Melissa, has anyone seen Lucas?" "Mom, he is probably calming his nerves." "Dad, someone check the bridal suite." Emma leaned closer and whispered, "This is getting weird." I nodded without taking my eyes off Noah. A minute later, the music stopped altogether. Silence spread across the ballroom faster than any announcement could. Conversations dissolved into whispers. Chairs creaked. Someone dropped a fork, and the sharp metallic sound echoed far louder than it should have. The wedding planner returned, except this time the confidence had disappeared from her face. She approached Noah, leaned close, and handed him a folded note. He frowned before opening it. I could not see the words, but I watched every trace of color leave his face. He read it once, then again, His fingers tightened around the paper until the edges crumpled. For several long seconds, he simply stared into the distance as though his mind had refused to accept what his eyes had already understood. The officiant quietly asked if everything was all right. Noah answered with a single shake of his head. That tiny movement felt louder than any scream. He stepped away from the altar without looking at anyone. The ballroom erupted into confused murmurs. My mother stood so quickly that her chair nearly tipped over. My father rushed toward one of the coordinators while relatives began calling Lucas over and over again. Every call went straight to voicemail. Emma looked at me. "Ethan, what is happening?" I wished I knew. Then another phone buzzed. Then another. The whispers changed. They were no longer asking where Lucas was. They were repeating what had just appeared online. A photograph. Lucas sitting inside an airport terminal beside another man. Both of them smiling as if they had already left this day behind. The caption was painfully short. "I am sorry. I cannot marry someone when my heart belongs somewhere else. Please forgive me." Gasps rippled through the room. My mother covered her mouth. My father closed his eyes as though carrying years of disappointment in a single breath. Nobody knew what to say because there were no words large enough for a moment like this. I searched for Noah until I spotted him slipping through a side exit into the quiet garden overlooking the lake. Without thinking, I followed. Outside, the cool breeze carried the scent of fresh water and summer flowers. Noah stood alone near the stone railing, still wearing the boutonniere Lucas had chosen only 2 days earlier. He laughed once, but it was not the kind of laugh that came from happiness. It sounded like disbelief trying to survive. He looked down at the folded note still resting in his hand. "I should have seen it," he whispered to himself. "I knew I should leave. This was not my place." He had never been mine to comfort. Yet my feet refused to move. I quietly removed my suit jacket, walked toward him, and draped it across his shoulders without saying a single word. Noah turned slowly, surprise filling his tired eyes. For the first time that day, he was not standing beside my brother. He was standing beside me. Noah did not say thank you right away. He simply held my jacket closed with one hand, as if he had forgotten how to do ordinary things. The breeze coming off the lake lifted the edges of the fabric, carrying away the distant sounds of confused guests and unanswered questions. We stood there in silence, two men surrounded by flowers that had been ordered to celebrate a future that no longer existed. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "I am sorry you had to see this," he said quietly. I almost laughed. Of all the people whose day had fallen apart, he was apologizing to me. "You do not have to apologize," I answered. "None of this is your fault." He stared at the water for a long moment before speaking again. I keep replaying the last few months in my head. Every conversation, every promise, every little moment that should have warned me. His voice never rose. It became softer instead, like someone folding away pieces of themselves one careful layer at a time. I wanted to tell him that love often hides the warning signs because hope is louder than reason. Instead, I simply stood beside him. Sometimes silence is kinder than advice. After another minute, he slipped my jacket off his shoulders and carefully handed it back. "Thank you, Ethan." Hearing my name from him after everything that had happened almost hurt more than the wedding itself. Before I could answer, one of the coordinators hurried into the garden and gently informed Noah that reporters had already started gathering outside the venue. He nodded with quiet understanding, straightened his tie, and walked away carrying only the folded note that had ended his future. He never looked back. Neither did I. 1 year later, my life looked completely different. I had moved into a small apartment above a family-owned bookstore in Milwaukee, where mornings smelled like fresh coffee and old paper instead of regret. My illustration work had finally become steady enough that I no longer needed freelance jobs every weekend just to pay rent. Most afternoons I spent drawing picture books for children, filling blank pages with talking foxes, adventurous turtles, and kids who always found their way home before sunset. It was strange how easy it was to create happy endings for fictional characters while avoiding my own. My neighbors knew me as the quiet illustrator who smiled at everyone and never forgot birthdays. They did not know there had once been a wedding invitation tucked inside the bottom drawer of my desk. I never threw it away. I simply stopped opening the drawer. As for Lucas, our conversations had become rare and painfully polite. He had sent apologies to everyone, including Noah, but apologies could not rewind time. He had chosen another life, and none of us were invited into it. My parents still hoped the family would heal someday. I hoped so too, although healing rarely followed anyone's schedule. One crisp Saturday morning, I volunteered at a community project restoring the oldest public library in the city. Children laughed as they painted colorful bookmarks while volunteers sorted donated books into neat stacks. I carried a box of illustrated classics toward the reading room, nudging the heavy wooden door open with my shoulder. Someone reached for the same door from the opposite side. We both stopped at once. The box nearly slipped from my hands. Standing only a few feet away, wearing a denim jacket dusted with sawdust and holding a toolbox instead of wedding flowers, was Noah Brooks. He looked just as surprised as I felt. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled, not the polished smile from the wedding, but a small, genuine one that carried equal parts disbelief and hope. "Hello, Ethan," he said softly. I did not expect life to give me another chance to say that. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined him. Life had a strange sense of humor, but this felt almost too perfectly timed to be real. Noah shifted the toolbox to his other hand and let out a quiet laugh. I guess we both volunteered for the same project. I looked down at the box of books balanced against my chest. "Looks that way." There was an awkward pause, the kind that only existed between people carrying too much history and not enough words. Then an elderly volunteer wearing a bright yellow apron appeared beside us with a clipboard. "Perfect," she said cheerfully. "You two can work together. We need the reading room finished before the kids arrive this afternoon." Before either of us could object, she walked away with the confidence of someone who had solved a problem without realizing she had created one. Noah glanced at me with an apologetic smile. "If you would rather switch partners, I understand." I surprised myself by shaking my head. "It is only one day." He nodded slowly. "Only one day." We spent the next hour arranging shelves, wiping dust from old oak bookcases, and carrying boxes that seemed much heavier than they actually were. The library smelled like cedar wood, aging paper, and fresh paint. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, leaving warm rectangles across the hardwood floor. Every now and then children peeked inside, asking when the reading room would be ready. Their excitement softened the silence between us. Noah turned out to be unexpectedly good at assembling furniture. He studied instruction manuals for barely 10 seconds before every screw somehow ended up exactly where it belonged. I, on the other hand, managed to install one shelf upside down. Noah looked at my work, pressed his lips together, and then quietly reached for the screwdriver. "Can I help?" he asked with remarkable kindness. I sighed dramatically. "Please do not tell anyone an illustrator lost a fight with a bookshelf." He smiled. "Your secret is safe with me. I appreciate your discretion. I am very trustworthy around furniture." I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound echoed softly through the room, startling me almost as much as it did him. It had been a long time since laughing around Noah felt natural instead of painful. We worked side by side for another hour, talking about ordinary things. My apartment above the bookstore, his recent move back to Milwaukee, the unusually cold spring weather, the best coffee shop within walking distance of the library. We carefully avoided every subject that actually mattered. Sometimes the biggest conversations hide behind the smallest ones. Around lunchtime, the volunteers gathered outside beneath a row of maple trees. Sandwiches, fruit, and lemonade covered 2 folding tables. I reached for a turkey sandwich at the exact moment Noah reached for the same one. Our hands stopped inches apart before both of us instinctively pulled back. "You take it," we said at exactly the same time. We looked at each other, then laughed again. Emma would have called it a romantic comedy moment. I called it deeply inconvenient. Later that afternoon, while organizing donated novels, I climbed a small stepladder to reach the highest shelf. One of the boxes slipped unexpectedly, sending several books tumbling toward the floor. Before I could react, Noah stepped forward and caught most of them against his chest. A single copy of Little Women landed between us with a soft thud. "Nice save," I said. He looked down at the stack in his arms. I have had a year of practice catching things before they fall apart. The joke sounded light, but something in his eyes told a different story. For the first time since we met again, neither of us looked away. There was sadness there, certainly, but there was something else too. Regret. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet enough to have followed him every single day. I picked up the last book from the floor and placed it gently on the shelf. When I turned back toward him, I realized he was already looking at me, as though he wanted to say something that had been waiting far longer than either of us had. Over the next 3 weeks, the library became part of my routine in ways I had never expected. Every Tuesday and Thursday after finishing my illustration work, I carried my sketchbook downstairs, grabbed a coffee from the corner cafe, and walked the 6 blocks to the old brick building where volunteers were slowly bringing forgotten stories back to life. Somehow, Noah was always there before me. Sometimes he was repairing loose shelves. Other times he was repainting window frames or helping children build tiny wooden birdhouses for the reading garden. He never acted as though he expected anything from me. He simply greeted me with an easy smile and a quiet, "Good morning, Ethan," as though we had always been friends instead of people connected by a memory neither of us could erase. One rainy afternoon, I arrived carrying 2 large boxes of donated picture books. The sidewalks shimmered beneath a steady spring shower, and by the time I reached the entrance my sleeves were damp and one corner of the top box had begun to split. Before I even reached the steps, the weight shifted unexpectedly. "Careful," a familiar voice called. Noah was beside me before I could answer. He caught the bottom box just as the cardboard gave way, preventing dozens of books from scattering across the wet pavement. "I think these boxes have officially retired," he said with a grin. I was hoping they could survive another 10 feet. They were optimistic. Together we carried everything inside, laughing quietly as volunteers teased us for looking like 2 librarians rescuing a collapsing castle of fairy tales. It felt easy, easier than it should have. Later that afternoon, the director gathered everyone together. "Wonderful news," she announced. "A local foundation has agreed to sponsor new reading programs because someone made a very generous anonymous donation." Applause filled the room. Children cheered because they heard the words "new books" and "free art classes." I clapped along with everyone else until I noticed Noah quietly slipping out through the side hallway. Something about the timing tugged at my curiosity. I followed a few minutes later under the excuse of throwing away empty coffee cups. Outside, I found him speaking with the director near the delivery entrance. "Please," Noah said softly, "do not tell anyone it came from me, especially Ethan." The director smiled kindly. "He deserves to know." Noah shook his head. "No. If he finds out, it will feel like I am trying to earn something. I am not. This place matters to him. That is enough." I stepped back before either of them noticed me, my heartbeat suddenly louder than the rain tapping against the windows. The anonymous donation, the new books, the repaired reading room. He had done all of it without taking credit. Not because he wanted admiration, but because he genuinely cared. The realization stayed with me for days. Then another surprise arrived. My landlord called to tell me the rent for the bookstore apartment would not increase after all because an anonymous tenant assistance fund had covered the difference for the entire year. "Someone around here thinks you should keep drawing," Mr. Harper said with a chuckle. "Lucky fellow." I thanked him, but something inside me quietly connected the pieces. Later that evening, I visited the library to return a stack of borrowed reference books. Through the half-open office door, I saw Noah repairing one of the tiny reading tables after everyone else had gone home. He was carefully sanding the edges so children would not catch splinters on their hands. No audience, no recognition, just patient kindness. He looked up, surprised to see me standing there. "You are still here?" I asked. He smiled without stopping his work. "Some things are worth fixing even when nobody notices." I looked at the little table, then back at him, wondering if he was talking about furniture at all. After that evening, something inside me refused to stay comfortably buried. Every small interaction with Noah carried a new question I had never allowed myself to ask before. Had I spent all those years believing I knew the whole story when I had only seen the surface? One Friday afternoon, the library hosted its first children's reading event since the renovation. Colorful paper lanterns hung from the ceiling, tiny sneakers raced between bookshelves, and excited voices filled every corner of the building. I sat on a little wooden stool teaching children how to draw woodland animals, while Noah helped parents assemble new bookshelves in the family reading section. Every few minutes I caught myself glancing in his direction. Not because I wanted to, because somehow my eyes kept finding him on their own. "Your fox looks sleepy," a little girl named Sophie announced, studying the sketch in my notebook. "Maybe he stayed up too late reading," I replied. She nodded very seriously. "Or maybe he misses somebody." Children had a remarkable talent for saying things adults spent years avoiding. Before I could answer, Noah walked over carrying a tray of juice boxes and cookies. Snack break, he announced. Sophie accepted a juice box before pointing directly at him. You make him smile more. I nearly dropped my pencil. Noah blinked in surprise. Do I? Sophie nodded with complete confidence. He smiles before you even get here because he knows you are coming. Then she skipped away as though she had not casually rearranged my emotional stability in under 10 seconds. Noah rubbed the back of his neck with an embarrassed laugh. Children are very observant. Apparently, neither of us knew what else to say. A week later, the director asked me to help organize old donation records in a storage room that had not been touched in years. Dust floated through narrow beams of afternoon sunlight, while cardboard boxes formed uneven towers around me. As I searched for volunteer paperwork, a worn blue folder slipped from the top shelf and landed at my feet. Across the front, written in black marker, were the words Community Restoration Project. Curious, I opened it. Inside were volunteer schedules, donation receipts, planning notes, and dozens of handwritten lists. One page immediately caught my attention. Anonymous contributions. Every major expense for the renovation had been quietly covered months before construction even began. Lumber, paint, children's furniture, reading lamps, art supplies. At the bottom of nearly every receipt was the same set of initials. NB. My chest tightened. Before I could close the folder, another folded sheet slipped onto the floor. It was a letter addressed to the foundation sponsoring the library. I recognized Noah's handwriting immediately. I did not mean to read it, but one sentence drew my eyes before I could stop myself. If possible, I would like all recognition removed from my name. The only person whose opinion matters to me has already spent enough years believing I only see what is obvious. I hope one day he discovers that I have been trying to become someone worthy of standing beside him. My hands froze. There was no signature, but there did not need to be one. Footsteps echoed outside the storage room. I quickly returned the letter to the folder just before Noah appeared in the doorway carrying another box of donated books. He smiled the same quiet smile I had seen dozens of times over the past month. I figured you could use some help in here. I looked at him differently now, not as the man who had once chosen someone else, but as someone who had been quietly rebuilding broken things one careful piece at a time, never asking anyone to notice. For the first time, I wondered if the person I had been waiting to forgive was not Noah at all. Maybe it was myself for assuming his story had ended the day my heart broke. That evening I walked home with the blue folder tucked beneath my arm, although I knew it did not belong to me. I had already decided to return it the next morning, but sleep refused to visit. Every sentence I had accidentally read echoed through my apartment above the bookstore. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows while the old radiator hummed like it was trying to tell its own story. I kept thinking about one line. Someone worthy of standing beside him. I had spent years believing Noah had walked away from the possibility of us without looking back. Now I was beginning to understand that regret could become its own kind of quiet companion. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls drifting up from the bakery across the street. I carried the folder back to the library before anyone else arrived. As I stepped inside, I heard familiar voices coming from the reading garden. One of them stopped me in my tracks. Lucas. I had not seen my brother in almost a year. He looked different. His confident smile had softened, and there were faint lines around his eyes that had not been there before. He was helping unload folding chairs from a pickup truck while speaking with the library director. Before I could decide whether to leave, Lucas turned and saw me. His expression shifted from surprise to relief. Ethan. I nodded cautiously. I did not know you were coming. Neither did I, he admitted with a small, awkward laugh. Mom told me about the renovation. I thought, maybe I could help. Before either of us could continue, Noah stepped out of the building carrying a crate of children's books. The moment his eyes met Lucas's, time seemed to hesitate. There was no anger, no dramatic confrontation. Only two people quietly acknowledging the weight of a past they could not change. Noah set the crate down. Good morning. Lucas returned the greeting just as calmly. Can we talk? Just for a minute. Noah glanced toward me before nodding. They walked to the far corner of the garden where blooming hydrangeas formed a natural wall of color. I had no intention of listening, but the breeze carried fragments of their conversation across the courtyard. I owe you more than an apology, Lucas said. You owe yourself one first. Noah answered gently. You were trying to become someone everyone expected. So was I. There was a long silence before Lucas spoke again. I have spent a year asking myself why I kept chasing something that never felt right. The truth is, I admired you. I mistook that admiration for love because it seemed easier than admitting neither of us belonged in that relationship. Noah looked down at the gravel path. I should have recognized it too. Lucas shook his head. No, you were trying to make something work because you are loyal. I was trying to prove something to myself. We both ignored what was standing right in front of us. Noah frowned slightly. What do you mean? My brother smiled with a sadness that felt strangely peaceful. You always looked at Ethan differently, even before I realized it myself. Noah did not answer. He did not need to. His silence said enough. Lucas continued. After the wedding, after everything fell apart, I kept remembering every family dinner, every birthday, every holiday. Whenever Ethan walked into a room, you smiled before you even noticed you were smiling. I was too blind to understand what I was seeing. I stood perfectly still behind the half-open garden gate, unable to move. Lucas took one step closer and placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. Do not waste another year carrying guilt for a choice that should never have been mine to begin with. If there is still a chance to make things right, do not let fear steal it again. Noah closed his eyes for a brief moment before quietly replying. I do not know if he could ever trust me. Lucas looked toward the library entrance where I was standing, just out of sight. Then spend the rest of your life giving him reasons to. He deserves that. And honestly, so do you. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of laughter, children's stories, and the comforting rhythm of ordinary moments. But my mind never left the conversation I had overheard. Every time Noah smiled at one of the children or patiently fixed another crooked bookshelf, I saw him differently. Not as the man who had broken my heart, but as someone who had spent an entire year quietly trying to become a better version of himself without asking anyone to notice. When the last family left and the library settled into peaceful silence, volunteers began stacking chairs and sweeping the reading room. I carried a box of art supplies toward the storage closet when Noah appeared beside me. Do you have a minute? He asked softly. His voice was calm, but I could hear the uncertainty beneath it. I nodded. We walked outside to the small garden overlooking the newly planted flower beds. The evening sun painted everything in warm shades of gold, and the fountain at the center of the courtyard filled the silence with gentle splashes of water. For a while neither of us spoke. Then Noah exhaled slowly. I have rehearsed this conversation more times than I can count, he admitted with a small, nervous smile. And somehow I still have no idea where to begin. I folded my arms lightly. Then do not rehearse it anymore. He looked down at the stone path before meeting my eyes again. I spent a long time believing I had made the responsible choice. Lucas was confident. Our lives seemed to fit together on paper. Everyone around us thought we made sense. I convinced myself that was enough. His voice remained steady, but every word carried the weight of quiet honesty. The day everything fell apart, I kept asking myself why losing that future hurt so much. It took me months to understand the answer. I was grieving the life I thought I was supposed to want, not the one my heart had been asking for. I listened without interrupting. He deserved that much. Noah took another slow breath. I remember every moment you stood beside me when you had every reason to walk away. You covered my shoulders with your jacket when I could barely stand. You treated me with kindness when I had done nothing to earn it. Then, when we met again at the library, you welcomed me into your world without demanding explanations. His eyes shimmered in the fading sunlight, not with tears, but with the vulnerability of someone choosing complete honesty for the first time. I am not asking you to forgive the past today. I am not asking you to love me because I finally understand what I should have seen years ago. If you cannot, I will accept that. He smiled sadly. But I cannot spend another day pretending the truth does not exist. My heartbeat felt impossibly loud. Noah looked directly at me, his expression calm despite the fear he was no longer trying to hide. The greatest mistake I ever made was believing love was something that looked perfect from the outside. Real love was standing quietly beside me all along, asking for nothing except honesty. That was you, Ethan. The evening breeze stirred the leaves above us as he continued. If all you can offer me is friendship, I will treasure it. If all you can offer me is forgiveness, I will spend the rest of my life grateful for it. But if there is even the smallest chance that one day you might let me earn a place beside you, Then I promise I will never take that gift for granted again. I searched his face for the polished confidence he once carried. So easily. It was gone. In its place stood someone who had learned that love was not proven by grand speeches, but by quiet choices repeated every single day. For the first time in years, I realized my heart was no longer asking whether I could trust Noah again. It was asking whether I was finally ready to stop being afraid of the answer. I did not answer right away. The garden had grown quiet except for the soft splash of the fountain and the distant laughter of a family walking through the park across the street. For years I had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. In every version, I thought I would know exactly what to say. Instead, I found myself smiling at the strange realization that life never followed the script we wrote in our heads. "Do you remember the first time we met?" I asked. Noah looked surprised by the question before a gentle smile appeared. "Outside the ice cream shop." I laughed softly. "I thought you had forgotten." He shook his head. "I remember everything about that day. You looked like you wanted to disappear because your ice cream was melting faster than you could eat it." I was embarrassed. "You were adorable." The word caught me completely off guard, and for the first time in years the old ache inside my chest did not return. Instead, it made room for something quieter, something lighter. Hope. I looked toward the children's reading garden where colorful pinwheels turned slowly in the evening breeze. "You know what the hardest part was?" I asked. Noah listened without interrupting. "It was never watching you choose someone else. It was convincing myself that I had to stop believing people could change." He lowered his eyes. "I know." I took one careful step closer. "Then let me be honest too. I cannot promise everything will suddenly be easy. I cannot pretend the past never happened." He nodded immediately. "I would never ask you to." "Good," I said with a smile. "Because I am not interested in pretending anymore." Noah let out a quiet breath that sounded as though he had been holding it for an entire year. I reached into my messenger bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was an illustration I had finished the night before for a children's book. Two foxes were rebuilding a tiny treehouse after a storm. One held a hammer. The other carried wooden planks. Above them I had written a single sentence. "Home is not the place that never breaks. It is the place where people choose to rebuild together." Noah studied the drawing for several seconds before looking back at me. "Is this?" "It is yours," I said. "Because I think I finally understand why you kept fixing shelves after everyone else went home." He smiled, his eyes brighter than I had ever seen them. "Would you let me take you to dinner?" he asked carefully. "Not because I expect anything. Not because I think one dinner changes the past. Just because I would like the chance to know you again." I pretended to think for a moment. "Only if we do not eat at a fancy restaurant." He laughed. "Why?" "Because the last formal event we attended together did not exactly go as planned." Noah covered his face with one hand, groaning dramatically. "Fair point." I grinned. "There is a little diner 3 blocks from my apartment. They make terrible coffee and excellent blueberry pie." "That sounds perfect." 1 year later, the library celebrated its anniversary with hundreds of families filling every room with laughter, books, and colorful drawings hanging from every wall. The reading garden had become the busiest corner of the neighborhood. My newest children's book sat on the front display shelf, dedicated to everyone brave enough to begin again. Noah stood beside me holding a paintbrush after helping children decorate birdhouses. Without thinking, our hands found each other naturally, comfortably, like they had finally learned where they belonged. Across the courtyard, Lucas smiled warmly before returning to help a little boy build a wooden bookshelf. There was no bitterness left between us, only gratitude for the lessons none of us had wanted but all of us had needed. As the evening sunlight settled across the library windows, I realized that love had never asked us to erase the past. It had only asked whether we were willing to build something kinder than the lives we once imagined. This time, we both answered yes.